I can almost remember it like it was yesterday, but it wasn't. It was about 30 years ago. I was a student at Mercer University, and I was taking a class that was an assigned class for the curriculum, and it was a psychology class, Psychology 101. And I didn't have any real interest in that at the time, but I needed to take it. And so we were in class that day, and I remember the professor introduced a concept to us that I had never heard of before, but I was very intrigued by it. It grabbed my attention. It was a concept developed by a professor, a Columbia University professor named Robert Merton. And he coined the term a self-fulfilled prophecy. And his background as a sociologist and studying human development, human personality, he said that from his observations and research and that of many others, that sometimes people can make things happen to them simply because they believe they will. And it's not that it's magic, it's just that because the belief is so strong, they begin to act in certain ways. Excuse me, they begin to act in certain ways that literally draw those events to them, be they negative or positive events in their lives. In fact, he went on to do another study to demonstrate that. It's called the Pygmalion Effect. And he said, basically what they did is they took a group of school teachers and they told the teachers that, you know, these 10 students have scored super high, their IQs are high on these tests, they're your brighter students. And these other 10 students, well, they didn't score as well, and they're sort of lower IQ students, and so just do the best you can with both groups. Well, because the teachers expected this group of students to do better than this group, guess what happened? This group with the, you know, supposed high IQs did better than the group who had lower IQs. And that's exactly the way that the students performed. But the interesting thing is that these were just regular students. There were no special students, and there are no, you know, high IQs, just average kids. But they discovered that the expectation of the teacher and what the teacher expected to happen had a big impact and effect on those students. Well, when I heard about that, and I heard about the self-fulfilled prophecy, that really drew my attention in. How is it possible that you can anticipate something happening and that type of thing begins to happen? Well, last week we were looking at the book of Job, and we looked at that great chapter, Job 14:14. And I wanted to stay in Job tonight because I had so many comments from people. And tonight I want us to look at Job 3, which is much earlier in the book, Job 3, verse 25. And here's what he says. For that which I have feared has come upon me, and that which I have dreaded has certainly befallen me. So Job says, the thing I feared the most, good gosh, I've got it all around me. Now, we don't know what Job feared. We know in chapter 2 and chapter 3, particularly in chapter 3, he's talking about all the terrible things that has happened in his life, all the bad things that are going on in his life. He should have never been born. The day he was born, it would have been better to be stillborn. Why has he ever lived? Why did he make it through his teenage years into adulthood? It just been better for him. And he tells us all these terrible things. And then Job gets to chapter 3, verse 25, and he announces, what I have feared has come upon me. Now, when I heard that statement in seminary or in college about a self-fulfilled prophecy, I already knew the book of Job pretty well. I mean, I've been preaching for a few years by that time. I started early. So I was very well familiar with some of the great passages in the Bible, in the book of Job certainly. And I knew about the passage. And so I thought, wow, I wonder if that could be a possibility as well. Well, you know the story of Job. Job was a good man. The Bible says in verse 1 of chapter 1, there was a man who lived in Uz, who was a good man, an upright man, a righteous man, who feared the Lord and obeyed him. And then you know the story of the devil coming and God saying, you can hit him, but don't, destroy himself, but you can kill everything else. And so, all these terrible things that happened in Job's life. And we know that at least when we look into the mindset of Job, among other things, we know that in chapter 3, verse 25, he makes the announcement. Nobody made it for him. Nobody said it. He himself said, what I have greatly feared has come upon me. I work with people, and I have for over 3 decades now, and I can tell you what you already know, and that is that most people are laden down, burdened down with fear of all kinds of things. I love the definition I heard of fear a long time ago. Fear, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. And so, whether fear-based information is real or not, it doesn't matter. If we think it's real to us. If we believe it's real, then it's real to us. And so fear has a great way of restricting us and limiting us and holding us back and making us not do certain things and making us do other things that God would never intend for us to do. One time somebody came up with a list, and I don't know how accurate it is, but somebody came up with a list of 6 things that the average person fears. The first one is the fear of poverty. Nobody wants to be broke and poor, can't pay their bills. The fear of criticism. Nobody wants people to be critical of them. We all want people to like us, not say bad, mean things about us. The fear of poor health. I knew a man growing up named Kelly Scarborough. By the time he was 19 years old, he lived into his 70s. By the time he was 19, he was already bedridden, blind, and couldn't move. And so for roughly 50 years, he lived his life that way. It used to scare me to death. I thought, good gosh, what did Kelly do to end up that way? So nobody wants to end up in poor health. Old age, people get fearful about old age, growing older and not being as strong, not being able to see as well, being more frail, your body parts beginning to not function well, having heart problems, all those things that come with old age that people are fearful of. They can't do what they used to do. And then, of course, the fear of death, which we talked about last week, that a lot of folks are fearful, of death. Well, Job had all these things happen to him. He had terrible things happen to him. Lost his children, lost his money, lost his wealth, lost his health. I mean, good Lord, if you read the story of Job, he's sitting around with pieces of broken pottery, cutting and pulling scabs off his body. Terrible, terrible things if you read the story. And then his friends came and criticized him for not being a good guy. And the Bible clearly says that he was. And so the Bible is a great book of history. It's a great book of theology, but it's also a great book of psychology. There's a lot of psychology in the Bible that you and I can benefit from. And this is one of those texts that I encourage us to look at and say, is there a deeper message, another message? There are lots of messages in the book of Job, but this might be one of them as well. Be careful what we fear. So after the crisis is over, you get to chapter 3. After all these things happen, he loses everybody. The Bible simply says, that which I have feared has come upon me. Harold Kushner, a Jewish rabbi who's gone now, passed away several years ago, but he wrote a great book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? It's a great book. If you've never read it, I encourage you to read it. But he talks about how good people often suffer in terrible, terrible ways. It's reality. And that's what happened to Job. Job suffers greatly. And he bemoans the fact. And do you know what? God never told him why. That's true. That's the thing you may or may not have remembered about Job. God never told Job why he lost and suffered so greatly. He just did. The Bible says in chapter 38 through 42 that God finally speaks. And boy, what a great set of chapters those are. Man, you can learn so much about God if you read those particular chapters. But God speaks to him out of the whirlwind. And God talks to him. And God, asks him certain great questions. Most scholars believe that the book of Job, is one of the greatest pieces of literature that's ever been written. Scholars who are Christians and scholars who are not, they look at the writing of Job as some of the finest literature in all the world. So many great lessons to be taught. So here's my thought. We don't know why these things happened to Job. There are so many lessons we could pull from. One that I personally have benefited from in my life is Job 3:25. That which I have greatly feared has come upon me. So it has motivated me to be careful what I allow to enter into my life as fear. That I'm not going to fear things. I look at it and I can turn that verse around and say, not only that which I have greatly feared, but rather that which I have greatly desired. That which I have greatly wanted has suddenly come to me. That which I have focused my mind on. Job said, what I feared has come to me, and it's a terrible bunch of stuff. The Bible says in Psalm 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. So rather than be fear-based, say, I'm going to delight myself in God and focus on what God might have for me. Genesis chapter 12 is sort of the getting off spot in the book of Genesis. You have Genesis 1 through 11, all kind of, in fact, the most debated chapters in the Bible are Genesis 1 through 11. But when you get to chapter 12, you have the introduction of Abraham. And God is telling Abraham, follow me. You don't know who I am. I'm going to send you somewhere. You don't know where you're going. Just go. But in chapter 12, verse 3, listen to what God says to Abraham. Not Job, but Abraham, who we believe actually came after Job. He says to him, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless your children. And listen to this. And I'm going to make you a blessing. I'm going to make you, Abraham, a blessing. And that's exactly what happened. Abraham expected to be a blessing. Brother Job said, that which I have greatly feared has come to me, and it's terrible and it's calamity. Abraham, on the other hand, said, I'm going to be a blessing, and God's going to bless me. For me, I think Abraham had the better approach, and both of them loved God. Which are you, fear-based or faith-based?